and welcome to a new vlog and video in cooperation with ReiseJung. We're taking a look at the second day on board of the Porto Mirante in Portugal on the river Douro, and here on the map you can see our route today. We're going from Porto with a short stop in Laverinho to Folgosa. We're taking a closer look at the route in the animation, so we're starting in the morning in Porto, or near Porto, sail past the old town of Porto, and we're leaving the city area. We're getting to the beautiful landscape of the river Douro. We're reaching the first lock of Leverkrestuma, and directly after the lock we're stopping shortly in Laverinho to pick up the guests that were on an excursion in Porto, and then we're sailing towards the most impressive lock of our journey, the lock Carrapatelo, which is the second highest lock in Europe, and then in the evening we're reaching our overnight stop in Folgosa. And here you can see the route in total. So we're starting in the morning with a nice breakfast in the restaurant, and after that it was time for me to leave the ship for a couple of minutes for a nice swim in the Douro River. It was not that warm actually. Back in Germany we had more than 35 degrees. Outside here in Porto we're around 25, but still enough for a short swim in the river before the ship was then leaving Porto with only a couple of guests on board. Most guests were joining the excursion to Porto and discovering the city center, but a few guests also decided to stay on board and not book the excursion. And with those guests we're now sailing past the old town of Porto called Ribeira, and this is going to be very spectacular. I couldn't join the excursion because I'm in charge for the announcements, so whenever there's something interesting to see, there will be an announcement made in the public areas of the ship explaining what you can see. First sight is the Ponte do Arabida. This is the bridge we took yesterday to get to our ship. Now we're sailing below it. We're also sailing below planes coming from the airport of Porto, and we can also see on the left side, on the Porto side, the old tram of Porto. There will be a video about this tram at the end of this series. But now we're sailing into the city center of Porto. We're getting to the Ribeira, the old town, and it's gonna be very spectacular. We're gonna see some colorful houses from the river all the way up to the hill where we have been yesterday at the Clerigos church. So it's gonna be spectacular. We've reached one of the main sites of Porto, the Ponte Luís, a very interesting double-decker bridge which is up to 60 meters high, and the interesting thing is the difference in altitude between the lower level and the upper level is around 45 meters. So it is a very interesting bridge, for sure the most beautiful one that we're sailing on during this cruise. After that there is a newer bridge, not that interesting, but behind that there is another old, very interesting bridge, the Ponte Maria Pia, which we can see here. It's made by Gustave Eiffel, who also built the Eiffel Tower. It's a railway bridge, not in use anymore. Right next to it is the newer building, and then we're sailing under a highway bridge, and that marks the end of the passage of the old town of the city of Porto. And that also means that we're now seeing less and less houses and more nature. The Douro changes the landscape from beginning till the end all the time. We're beginning in the big city of Porto, then we're getting slowly into the nature, and in the end we will barely see some houses and we will be sailing through vineyards. It's now also time to give you some information about the Douro. The river is 897 kilometers long, coming from Spain. For 112 kilometers, the river is the border between Spain and Portugal, and at the end of this shared border is a place called Vega Terron, and this is the end point of our cruise, and it's also the highest point of the Douro that you can reach with cruise ships. There are 5 locks on the Douro. The highest one is 35 meters high. This is the lock of Carrapatelo that we're gonna reach in this video. And of course, the river is famous for the port wine, and we will reach the vineyards later on in the series. Here we can see another lock. This is of course not the highest lock. This is the lock of Leverkrestuma, only 13.9 meters high. 30.9 meters is a pretty high lock when you compare it to regular river cruises, for example on the Danube or on the Rhine, but here it's the smallest lock. Here you can see how the sky lounge is lowered, because when we reach the highest point of the lock there is always a bridge going over the lock, and those bridges are quite low, so all high parts of the sun deck have to be removed, and that also means that the sky lounge has to be folded down. We will see later on how it unfolds when we have left up the lock. Directly after leaving the lock we're meeting an interesting ship called Spirit of Chartwell, which has a very beautiful ship horn. Spirit of Chartwell also has a very interesting history, as it was sailing on the River Thames, and it was a royal barge as part of Queen Elizabeth II's Diamond Jubilee celebrations, and the Queen was on board of this ship. But nowadays it's sailing as a river cruise ship on the Douro. Here we have just seen how the sky lounge was folded up again, and now we're making a brief stop in Leverino to pick up the guests that made the excursion to Porto, and now with all guests we're sailing further up the River Douro. In the meantime I enjoyed lunch in the sky lounge, a nice burger which I forgot to film, and a nice starter and a nice dessert, so also there the food was very good. And now as you can see the landscape has already changed, there are less houses and we're now in the nature. You can see a lot of trees, and we're now reaching the sharpest bend of the River Douro that we're sailing through by ship, as you can see here. And then we continue to sail through beautiful landscape. As you can see, the river is getting tighter now, and that means that we're approaching a lock. Always below the lock the river is pretty small, as there's less water of course, but before reaching the lock it was time for the first culinary highlight of the cruise, the high tea time. Now we're slowly approaching another highlight of the cruise, and that is the lock of Carrapatelo, the second highest lock in Europe. There's only one lock in the Ukraine that is a little bit higher, but this one for sure is the most impressive lock in Europe. Here you can see it. It has a length of 87 meters, so only a few meters longer than our ship, and a ship cannot be wider than our ship to go into this lock. There are only a few centimeters left on each side. It was built from 1965 to 1972, so it's the oldest and of course also the highest lock on the River Douro. It has a difference in altitude of 35 meters. You can also clearly see this when you see a ship coming out of the lock, and we will also see it once we're inside. It's very impressive to go into the lock because your ship is basically taking you into a black hole. You cannot see the sky when you're going into the lock, as there are 35 meters of concrete above you. So that's very impressive. If you're claustrophobic, I would recommend going to your cabin and just close the curtains, because if you're claustrophobic this is going to be very scary, but otherwise it's just impressive. And even though it started to rain, most guests were on the outside decks to experience this incredible piece of engineering. I think this shot clearly shows how impressively high this lock actually is, and that there's almost no space left around the ship. So it is actually very, very impressive, and you should definitely not miss this lock. It's also quite astonishing how fast we are actually going up. Here you can see it in a time lapse. Just took a couple of minutes to gain 35 meters of altitude, and then we continued sailing through beautiful landscape and beautiful nature on our way to our stop in Folgosa. There's one thing that's quite unique about the River Douro, as there are some parts that are so narrow that it would be too dangerous to sail in the night. It's not allowed actually to sail in the night, and therefore we're always stopping at some small villages for the night. And that also means that we're sailing always during the day, of course, so you can always enjoy the beautiful landscape. Whilst a lot of other tour operators are using this sailing time for excursions, just like we did in the morning, you're leaving the ship, doing an excursion, coming back in another port, we try to have it as few times as possible, because for us the most beautiful part about sailing on the River Douro is actually the sailing, because there is incredible landscape, usually very nice weather, so you can spend a whole day on the sun deck and there's always something interesting to see. So for us this was the highlight of sailing on the Douro, and that's why we mostly had our excursions when we were docked in the port, because those ports are basically very small villages, there's not that much to do, so we'd rather use this time for the excursions and spend the sailing time on board. We're sailing past the biggest city along the river except for Porto and Vila Nova de Gaia. This is Regua, and we're gonna stop here on our way back. Once you sail past Regua, there are 3 bridges over the Douro, which is also looking very beautiful. And then just a few minutes later, we're reaching the lock of Regua, the last lock for today. In this lock, we're gonna gain an altitude of around 28.5 meters. A couple of seconds ago, you've also seen a train. There's a train line on the bank of the Douro, which is considered to be one of the most beautiful railway lines in the world, and hopefully it will be part of a video in the future as well. Whilst we dock in Folgosa, it was then time for dinner, which was amazing again. Not only the quality was very nice, but there was also a very wide choice of dishes, more than on a regular river cruise ship, and one of those choices was always a local dish, and mostly I opted also for the local dish. Here we are docked in Folgosa, a very small village with almost no tourist attractions, but it comes with a Michelin-starred restaurant. But otherwise it's just a small village. So here you can clearly see it's a very typical Portuguese village. There are no tourist attractions, but you can see a lot of cats, which I really liked. And that's basically what's happening on all the stops you're gonna have on the Douro. You're just leaving the ship in the evening for a short walk through the village and then you head back on board. You cannot expect any tourist attractions. The villages we are stopping in are basically just typical villages, so you're gonna have a nice walk and then you spend the rest of the night on board, and then the next morning you're leaving and enjoy the landscape again. So that's basically what an evening looks like on a Douro cruise. What you can of course also do is go into the pool and enjoy the evening there, and what I really like is that on a Porto Mirante you can even get drinks in the pool. They have special plastic glasses and the drinks will be served directly in the pool. But that's it for day 2. In the next video we will take a look at day 3. Here you can see when the next video will be uploaded and the name of the song. As always, thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, make sure to comment, like, subscribe or share the video link, and I hope to see you in my next video, or maybe one day on board. More information can be found on reisejung.de and also in the upcoming videos.